The air in the sterile, beige conference room was thick with expensive perfume, recycled air, and the smell of undeserved victory. Cynthia VanOwen, president of the Heron's Point HOA, slid the certified eviction notice across the polished mahogany table. Her movements were sharp, precise, like a predator cornering its prey. Her smile was a thin, bloodless line. "As you can see, Major Stone," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescending sweetness that only truly wealthy people who have never been told no can muster. "Your family's trust is delinquent. The adverse possession claim is valid. The local court has granted us title. You have 30 days to vacate." Her attorney, a slick man in a suit that cost more than my truck, tapped his pen impatiently. "It's just business, son," he chimed in, not even looking at me. "You should have stayed on top of your property. People serve, they come home, they find things have changed. It's the cost of doing business." I didn't look at them. I didn't look at the eviction notice. I just stared at the watercolor painting of a heron on the wall, a cheap, mass-produced imitation of artistry in a room devoid of soul. I was still in my desert fatigues, having driven straight from the airport. The grit and dust from Bagram Airfield was still under my fingernails, still in the lines on my face. I'd spent the last 12 months building critical water infrastructure in a war zone, only to come home and find the real war was here, in a beige conference room. Cynthia cleared her throat, a small, impatient sound. "Major, did you hear me? We're on a schedule. 30 days. I finally moved. I reached into the breast pocket of my uniform, past my service ribbons, and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. It was old, yellowed, and brittle at the creases. It wasn't the eviction notice. I didn't say a word. I just slid it across the table. Cynthia and her lawyer glanced at each other, annoyed. The lawyer, with a sigh, picked it up, unfolded it, and began to read. I watched his face. It was a fascinating study. First, confusion, then annoyance. Then his eyes scanned the page again, and the annoyance was replaced by a flicker of curiosity. Then his eyes widened, just slightly, and the color began to drain from his face. He read it a third time, his mouth now slightly open. "Cynthia," he whispered, his professional smirk completely gone. What is this? Where did you get this?" "What is what?" she snapped, her patience gone. "This," I said, my voice quiet, but it cut through the room like a diamond, "is a 1947 federal water rights covenant. It was signed by my grandfather, Elias Stone, and the United States Soil Conservation Service. It predates your HOA, your county charter, and your entire pathetic development by 30 years. I leaned forward. "It gives me, and only me, senior rights to every drop of water in this valley, including the entire natural flow of Stones Creek. And right now, your 35 luxury homes are illegally built on a 100-year floodplain, a floodplain you created by illegally diverting my creek." The lawyer was shaking his head, looking at his client. "You didn't just steal my land while I was deployed, ma'am," I continued, my voice level. "You committed federal insurance fraud, you violated the Clean Water Act, and you built your entire paradise in a dry bathtub, and I still own the faucet." Cynthia's smile was gone. "This," I said, pushing my chair back, "this was about gravity, and I'm about to turn it back on." My grandfather, Elias Pop Stone, was not a complicated man. He believed in God, hard work, and that water was a responsibility, not a commodity. He bought Stones Hollow, 200 acres of rolling Carolina hills back in 1955. It was wild, beautiful, and cut through by a powerful creek that flooded every spring and dried to a trickle every August. Pops wasn't just a farmer. He was a self-taught engineer and a hydrologist. In 1958, working with the newly formed Soil Conservation Service, Pops did something remarkable. He built the Stones Hollow Dam. It wasn't a massive concrete monument, but an over-engineered marvel of earth and stone. I remember being 8 years old, my hands raw, helping him mix concrete for the spillway foundation. It created a 30-acre reservoir. But it wasn't for our farm. It was for everyone downstream. Pop's dam was a flood control system. It captured the violent spring floods and, through a manually operated spillway, released the water slowly during the dry months. It saved the crops of a dozen downstream farms. He never charged a penny for the water. "You can't sell God's rain," he'd say, his hand on the giant iron spillway wheel. "You can only be a good steward of it. This dam is a promise, Cal. You protect the valley, even from itself." He taught me to read the water, to respect the engineering. He'd hold up a handful of soil. "Cal," he'd say, "you don't own land, you just borrow it. Your job is to leave it better than you found it." When I joined the Army Corps of Engineers, it felt like I was just continuing his work. Building dams, wells, and water systems in Afghanistan, it was the same promise. Then, 2 years into my deployment, Pops passed away peacefully in his sleep. He left the farm to me. I was 7,000 miles away, trying to keep a village from drying up, and I couldn't even make it home for his funeral. I did the only thing I could. I put the farm in a trust, managed by a big, faceless bank in Charlotte. I told them to pay the taxes and keep trespassers out. I set up the payments. I did everything right. I never dreamed the trespassers would be the ones building the houses. I came home to a different world. The gravel road to Stones Hollow, the one I learned to drive on, was gone, replaced by a paved, private road called Heron's Point Parkway, complete with a ridiculously large, gaudy entrance gate. When I drove up to my grandfather's farmhouse, a golf cart blocked my path. A woman in a white tennis visor, who I now know was Cynthia VanOwen, looked at me with open disdain. "This is a private community, sir. Deliveries are around the back." "I'm Cal Stone," I said, holding back my anger. "I own this farmhouse. This is my land." Her expression didn't change. "Not according to our records," she said. It wasn't just Cynthia. It was her lieutenants. 2 other women, both in identical, crisp white tennis outfits, sat in the golf cart behind her, sipping from metal water bottles. They were looking at my dusty truck and my uniform like it was a stain. "You must be the soldier," one of them said, not bothering to get out. "We were wondering when you'd show up." The shock was profound. The new development, Heron's Point, wasn't next to my farm. It was on it. They had seized my lower 40 acres, the entire floodplain. Where Pops' cattle used to graze, there were now 35 beige McMansions, all with identical manicured lawns. And the creek? My God, the creek was gone. They had diverted it, built a massive, illegal concrete channel to shunt the water around their new development. My grandfather's 30-acre reservoir was now stagnant, the water level dangerously high and backing up. The dam, which was designed for constant flow, was under immense pressure. The downstream farms I passed on the way in, their fields were brown and cracked. They had stolen the water from everyone. I confronted Cynthia at the next HOA meeting, held in that same beige conference room. She was polite, cold, and utterly dismissive. "Major Stone, your family abandoned this land for years. We filed for adverse possession. We've been paying taxes on this parcel. It's perfectly legal. We've improved the community." "You improved it?" I said, looking at the dead fields downstream. "Of course," she said, gesturing to a framed photo of the cookie-cutter houses. "This is progress. Your grandfather's dusty old farm was an eyesore, a hazard. In fact," she added, her eyes glinting with a new, sharper threat, "we're concerned your dam is unsafe. It's a danger to our residents. We'll be having the county inspect it." She was threatening to condemn my grandfather's legacy. I hired a local lawyer. He took one look at the paperwork and sighed. "Son, you're looking at $100,000 in legal fees just to fight the adverse possession. Their lawyers are from the biggest firm in Charlotte, and Cynthia's husband, he's a developer who basically owns the county zoning board. You were outmaneuvered while you were gone."
I was a soldier, betrayed by the very system I was fighting to protect. They used my service against me. They called my deployment abandonment. If I learned one thing in the Corps, it's that every problem is an engineering problem, and every system has a critical flaw. I fired the lawyer. I went to the county courthouse myself. Not the main office, but the basement, the archives, the place where the real records are kept, covered in dust, managed by a clerk who had been there since 1970. For 3 days, I lived on stale coffee and the smell of old paper. I wasn't just a soldier, I was an engineer. I knew how to read blueprints, surveys, and water reports, and on the 4th day, I found it. It was in a misfiled cabinet under Public Works, defunct. A thick, cloth-bound ledger, and inside, the document, a 1947 Federal Water Rights Covenant. My hands were shaking. I wasn't just looking at a piece of paper, I was looking at the kill shot. It was an agreement between Elias Stone and the U.S. Soil Conservation Service. It guaranteed my family's right to the creek's natural and historical flow, and this was the part that made my heart stop. It gave the dam's owner sole discretion and legal obligation to manage the water for regional flood control and agricultural preservation. It was a federal document. It superseded any county zoning, any local court, and any parasitic HOA. Cynthia's lawyers had checked the land deeds. They never checked the water rights. My training kicked in. This wasn't a land dispute. This was a systems failure. I spent the next week doing what I do best, reconnaissance. Recon 1, the creek. Their illegal diversion, it was shoddy work. They just bulldozed the new channel and lined it with cheap concrete. It wasn't built to handle a real storm, it was built to look pretty. Recon 2, the development. I pulled the original Heron's Point development plans, and I found the motive. The entire 35-house development was built directly in the 100-year floodplain. Recon 3, the fraud. I pulled their federal flood map applications. To get insurance and bank loans, Cynthia's development company had submitted a fraudulent environmental impact report. They didn't just omit my dam, they erased it. They submitted a topographical map showing the land as dry pasture. This was wire fraud, mail fraud, insurance fraud, bank fraud, and it was all predicated on my dam not existing. The game changer ally? I made one call. To a colonel at the Army Corps of Engineers, my old CO. He was furious. Cal, they lied on a federal document and they compromised a flood control dam built with federal guidance? Oh, they are in a world of trouble. He put me in touch with the regional EPA director, a no-nonsense woman named Jensen. I sent her my file, the 1947 covenant, the original dam blueprints, and the fraudulent flood map. Her email back was one word: when. The escalation came as expected. Cynthia felt the heat. She started a smear campaign. The unstable veteran, she called me. She had community standards officers, those same Karens in golf carts, leave tickets on my farmhouse for unapproved paint color and rust on agricultural equipment, my grandfather's 1960s tractor. They were poking a bear. They had no idea the bear was an engineer.
The plan was simple. It wasn't revenge, it was maintenance. My 1947 covenant required me to manage the flood risk. Their illegal diversion had caused my reservoir to back up to a dangerously high level. Worse, a major tropical storm was moving up the coast. If I did nothing, the dam could overtop, fail catastrophically, and wipe out their development and the farms downstream. If I acted, as I was legally obligated to do, I could save the dam, honor my grandfather's promise, and reestablish the natural and historical flow of the creek. I chose to act. I spent 2 days servicing the spillway, the massive 50-year-old iron wheel, the gears thick with grease, the smell of hydraulic fluid. I documented every step. I posted official laminated notices as required by the covenant in a 5-mile radius, including on the Heron's Point community billboard. Notice, emergency spillway maintenance and controlled water release, 48 hours. The panic was immediate. Cynthia, her lawyer, and 2 county deputies raced to my dam. It was 6 a.m. The sky was dark purple with the approaching storm. "Stop this!" Cynthia shrieked, waving a piece of paper. "I have an emergency restraining order. You are endangering 35 families. I am ordering you to stop." "No, ma'am," I said calmly, holding my phone up on speaker. "You are. I'm on a conference call with Director Jensen of the EPA and Colonel Davies from the Army Corps of Engineers. They are federally observing this emergency release." I pointed to the dam. "Your illegal diversion has created a catastrophic flood risk. This restraining order is void. My federal covenant to perform flood control supersedes your local injunction. Director, are you getting this?" From my phone, a new voice, crisp and female. "We are, Major, and we have a federal warrant for Miss VanOwen's arrest for interfering with a federally protected waterway." The deputies looked at each other, then took a step away from Cynthia. Their authority just evaporated. The lawyer's face went white. He knew he was beaten. "Cynthia," he stammered, "he's right. Federal preemption. We have to go." "I'm not going anywhere," she screamed. "I will have you arrested for—" "For what?" I asked. "For upholding federal law? For preventing a disaster you created? Now I suggest you and your deputies move to higher ground." I turned my back on her. I put my hands on the cold iron wheel. I said a silent word to Pops. "This is for you." And I began to turn. The sound was not a roar. It was a deep, powerful groan. The sound of 50-year-old steel moving as it was designed to. Then came the hiss, which grew into a surge. It wasn't a tidal wave. It was a precise, calculated 10,000 gallons per minute flow of steady brown water. It didn't rush at the houses. It rushed into the dry, diverted creek bed they had built their community on. It flowed exactly where it was supposed to. I watched from the dam wall as the water hit their illegal concrete channel. The channel, not built for this pressure, cracked and blew out in seconds. The water flowed under their roads, through their community garden, and across their pristine tennis courts. The 35 McMansions weren't washed away. Their perfect green lawns, their brand new patios, and their meticulously landscaped flower beds were suddenly submerged in 3 feet of steady flowing water. The natural floodplain had reasserted itself. The 35 houses were now 35 lakefront properties, whether they liked it or not. Gravity and federal law had won. The aftermath was cleansing. The storm hit that night, and the spillway performed perfectly, saving the entire valley from a catastrophic flood. The national news didn't show a dangerous veteran. They showed an Army Corps hero who saved the community by restoring a vital waterway. Cynthia VanOwen's world collapsed. The 35 homes, now officially and permanently in a floodplain, were declared uninhabitable. The bank fraud and insurance fraud investigations voided every policy. Cynthia and her developer husband were indicted on 12 federal counts, including violating the Clean Water Act and conspiracy to defraud the U.S. government. The HOA went bankrupt in a single day. The land? It all reverted to the Stones Hollow Trust. The following spring, I stood on my grandfather's dam. The creek was flowing freely. I'll never forget the look on Old Man Hemphill's face, one of the downstream farmers, when his irrigation ditch filled for the first time in 2 years. He just cried. He and his neighbors showed up the next day with tools and tractors, volunteering to help. The Karens in tennis outfits who had sneered at me from their golf carts, they were part of a class action lawsuit against Cynthia, claiming she'd exposed them all to financial ruin. It was beautiful. I could have sold the land. I could have become a millionaire, but that wasn't Pop's way. With the settlement money from the federal lawsuit, I tore down the 35 ruined beige houses. I used the salvage material to build a new community center and a farmer's market pavilion. We named the 40 acres the Elias Stone Community Preserve. It's a public park now. The creek flows free, families hike there, the farmers downstream have their water, and the reservoir is healthy. I kept the farmhouse, of course. It's quiet here.
The air smells like pine and damp earth. It smells like my childhood. It smells like a promise kept. My name is Cal Stone, and I believe in gravity. I believe in honoring the promises we make. And I believe that sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to find the original blueprints and restore the natural flow. If you believe that the little guy deserves to win and that integrity is worth fighting for, subscribe to this channel. We have a lot more chronicles to share and a lot more receipts to review.